Eritrea's independence from Ethiopia in 1993 is one of the most interesting cases of secession in modern international relations. While many may think of it as a rare example of a successful unilateral secession, it wasn't. Instead, it falls into a very unusual, if not unique, category. In this video, I'm going to explore Eritrea's path to statehood. I'll show that it won its statehood by effectively turning the tables on its parent state. Hello, my name is James Ker-Lindsay. Welcome to Independent Thinking, a channel dedicated to international relations, independence, statehood, and the origins of countries. Time and time again, I've stressed just how difficult it is for peoples to break away and gain independence in the modern world. In many cases, the campaign for statehood is defeated, or else the territory in question finds itself reintegrated back into the parent state. In the more successful scenarios, the breakaway area may become a de facto state, effectively separate but largely unrecognised on the world stage. However, just occasionally, a long-standing secessionist campaign is successful and results in the creation of a new country. One of the most interesting cases of successful secession in the past 30 years was Eritrea's independence from Ethiopia in 1993. Coming at the end of a bitter and brutal 30-year war, it's a surprisingly rare case of a territory that breaks away and eventually manages to get full international recognition and a seat at the United Nations. Given that it had been pursuing independence since the start of the 1960s, many believe that it's a case of unilateral secession. In truth, it isn't. It became independent with the permission of Ethiopia. However, the way in which it secured this permission is a truly remarkable and unusual story. So, how did Eritrea gain its independence? Eritrea lies in northeast Africa, bordered by the Red Sea along its eastern coast. Its neighbours include Djibouti to its southeast and Sudan to its northwest. However, its longest land border is with Ethiopia. At around 120,000 square kilometres or 45,000 square miles, its population, according to latest UN estimates, is about 3.5 million inhabitants. By virtue of its strategic location along one of the world's key trading routes, it has a long and rich history. However, the story really begins in the 19th century with the expansion of European colonialism in Africa. In 1869, the first Italian commercial enterprise was established in Eritrea. Then, 20 years later, in 1890, the Kingdom of Italy formally established the colony of Eritrea. Following Italy's conquest of the Empire of Ethiopia in the mid-1930s, Eritrea was incorporated into the newly formed territory of Italian East Africa alongside Ethiopia and Italian Somaliland. In 1941, Italy was defeated by British forces and Ethiopian guerrillas during the Second World War and forced to relinquish its African holdings. While Ethiopia regained its previous independence and in fact went on to become one of the founding members of the United Nations in 1945, Eritrea now found itself under British rule. This continued until the end of the war, when the territory was formally placed under British trusteeship. Meanwhile, Italian Somaliland was eventually placed back under Italian administration in 1949. It gained its independence in 1960 and united with British Somaliland to create Somalia. I look at the unhappy consequences of this in my video on Somaliland. I put a link above and in the description below. In line with the process of decolonisation taking place at the time, the expectation was that the people of Eritrea would be given the right of self-determination. However, this divided society, which was almost evenly split between Muslims and Christians. For the Muslim inhabitants of the country, the aim was independence, or, failing that, a period as a UN trusteeship under British rule. In contrast, for the Christians, the vast majority of which belonged to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the clear preference was for union with neighbouring Ethiopia, an option supported by the Ethiopian government, which not only laid historical claim to the area, but also saw it as providing important access to the sea. Unable to agree a single course of action, the Commission returned three options. The first was the annexation of the territory by Ethiopia. The second was a federation between Ethiopia and Eritrea, and the third was a 10-year period of UN trusteeship leading to independence. On the 2nd of December 1950, the General Assembly passed Resolution 390A. Taking into account the various issues, this recommended that Eritrea, as a single autonomous unit, be federated with Ethiopia. A little under 2 years later, on the 15th of September 1952, Eritrea formally united with Ethiopia to form the Federation of Ethiopia and Eritrea. Almost from the start, it proved to be an unhappy union. Ethiopia, with its long history of independence and far greater in geographical size and population, naturally saw itself as a superior partner in the relationship. Over the course of the following decade, discontent grew in Eritrea, and in September 1961, an uprising was launched against Ethiopian rule by the Eritrean Liberation Front, the ELF. In response, on the 2nd of November 1962, Ethiopia formally dissolved the federation, annexed Eritrea, and removed its autonomy. Over the course of the next decade, fighting took place between Ethiopian forces and ELF guerrillas in what has since become known as the Eritrean War of Independence. However, the situation took a very different turn when, on the 12th of September 1974, the Emperor of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, was overthrown by a Marxist revolution. As Ethiopia now sunk into civil war, the Eritrean independence movement found common cause with Ethiopian anti-government forces. This became particularly significant when, in the late 1970s, the ELF split. The new Eritrean People's Liberation Front, EPLF, eventually supplanted the ELF as the main Eritrean resistance movement. More importantly, in the years that followed, it allied with the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the TPLF, which became the largest of Ethiopia's resistance movements. The fighting in Ethiopia and Eritrea continued throughout the 1980s, contributing to the horrific famine that attracted so much worldwide attention. Indeed, it's estimated that in one way or another, the conflict resulted in the deaths of over 1.5 million people. However, by the start of the 1990s, the rebel forces were gaining the upper hand, not least of all because the Ethiopian government's loss of military support following the collapse of the USSR at the end of the Cold War. In the last week of May 1991, the forces of the US-backed TPLF, the EPLF and other assorted allies entered Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, and ousted the government. The successful overthrow of the Ethiopian government marked a key moment for Eritrea. Almost immediately, the EPLF set up a government in Asmara, the capital of Eritrea, and announced that it would hold a referendum on independence. Meanwhile, at the start of July, representatives of over 20 parties and national communities met to discuss the future of Ethiopia. There they agreed that Eritrea could not be forced to remain a part of Ethiopia against its will. Just days after the new Ethiopian administration accepted Eritrea's right to secede, the EPLF proclaimed Eritrea's independence and announced that it would hold a referendum. The following year, the UN General Assembly passed Resolution 47/114, authorising the establishment of a UN mission to verify that referendum. Between the 23rd and the 25th of April 1993, the people of Eritrea went to the polls to vote on statehood. With a 98.5% turnout, the result was never in doubt. A massive 99.83% voted in favour of independence. Indeed, while 1.1 million people voted for statehood, just 1,822 voted against independence. Just over a month later, on the 28th of May 1993, Eritrea was admitted as the 183rd member of the United Nations. As a postscript to the story, despite the good terms of the initial decision to separate, relations between Eritrea and Ethiopia have been anything but peaceful since then. In May 1998, just 5 years after Eritrea became independent, it went to war with Ethiopia over a disputed border. The conflict lasted 2 years until a ceasefire was called in June 2000. This dispute was finally resolved almost 2 decades later in 2018, when Ethiopia and Eritrea signed a peace agreement on Ethiopia's initiative. Indeed, for this, Abiy Ahmed Ali, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, was actually awarded the 2019 Nobel Peace Prize. As the citation noted, it was given to him for his efforts to achieve peace and international cooperation, and in particular for his decisive initiative to resolve the border conflict with neighbouring Eritrea. Eritrea's independence from Ethiopia is one of the most interesting cases of secession in the modern era. As a relatively early case of decolonisation, it's an interesting case where the decision on what to do was not made by the people in question. Instead, it was the UN that decided Eritrea's fate, establishing a federation with Ethiopia, even though this went against the stated wishes of half the population and was quite obviously an unequal relationship. However, it was the process of its independence that really stands out. In a previous video, I discussed the case of Bangladesh's independence from Pakistan and noted that this is the only case of unilateral secession leading to full UN membership since 1945. However, many also suggested that Eritrea can be considered a case of unilateral secession. In fact, as I've shown, it isn't. To be sure, its decision to break away was vehemently and violently opposed by successive Ethiopian regimes, first under the imperial rule of Emperor Haile Selassie, and then by the communist regime that overthrew him. However, in the end, its independence was achieved with the full support of the Ethiopian government. Ultimately, it was the way in which it secured that acceptance from the parent state that makes it so special, if not unique. It's perhaps the only country in the modern world that achieved its statehood not by wearing down the parent state and achieving independence by a peace agreement, a rare enough occurrence in its own right. But instead, it managed to gain its statehood by confronting a government that opposed that independence and overthrowing it. I hope you found this interesting and useful. If so, here are some more videos that you might enjoy. And please don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications for regular updates. I post new videos every Friday. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.